public discourse is saturated with the missile threat. The strategic importance of assets in locations like Greenland is framed entirely around missile defense. This is a calculated misdirection. It anchors our strategic thinking to a visible, kinetic, 20th century vector. It assumes the adversary will play by established rules of engagement. That assumption is now the primary systemic risk. The decisive vector is not an explosion, it is silence. A deliberate, targeted severance of the data nervous system that underwrites Western economic and military solvency. When the Japanese Ministry of Defense reports a Russian intelligence vessel probing the waters near its islands, it is not a prelude to a naval battle. According to CSIS analysis, these are mapping operations for critical undersea infrastructure, the fiber optic cables carrying over 99% of global data and financial transactions. This blueprint creates the blind Leviathan, a superpower stripped of its sensory apparatus. Its carrier groups are still afloat. Its economic power exists on paper. But with its undersea cables severed and its satellite constellations kinetically or electronically blinded, it is paralyzed. It possesses immense conventional force, but lacks the data to deploy it. It cannot confirm asset locations, clear financial transactions, or execute command and control. A blinded state is the ultimate asymmetric leverage. A superpower made impotent by low-cost, deniable attacks is pushed into a solvency crisis, not of capital, but of options. When you cannot see the enemy, you cannot target the enemy with conventional assets. The strategic playbook narrows to a single, final protocol. This is not a failure of deterrence. It is the endgame. The motive is not ideology. It is a solvency crisis. According to analysis from institutions like CSIS, a prolonged kinetic war is a domestic liability for a state like Russia, a slow-burn liquidation of its treasury and political stability. When the financial and political cost of a conventional ground war becomes untenable, the state must pivot. It is a mathematical certainty. This weakness forces the pivot to asymmetric escalation. The objective is no longer to match the West tank for tank, but to discover vectors that impose disproportionate costs. This is the new blueprint for strategic competition. A deniable cyber attack on Poland's heating grid is not random malice. It is a low-cost probe of NATO's critical infrastructure. A Russian intelligence vessel operating near Japan is not a prelude to invasion. It is a gray zone operation mapping adversary response times and sensor grids. Adversaries are operationalizing the very AI-enabled drone swarms. The DIU is now offering $100 million in prizes to simply orchestrate. They weaponize our own systems against us. The renewed strategic focus on Greenland for missile defense is a direct admission that the homeland is no longer a sanctuary from these vectors. Each successful probe is a withdrawal against the West's economic solvency. The goal is to make our conventional dominance a strategic liability. Too expensive to deploy, too slow to respond. When your primary weapon system is the dollar, your enemy's primary target is your balance sheet. The math is the weapon. The Royal United Services Institute, or RUSI, has modeled the kinetic cost. On one side, a $5 million main battle tank, the apex of industrial-age land power. On the other, a $500 first-person view drone with an improvised explosive. This is not a fair fight. It's a solvency crisis. The adversary is not trying to destroy the tank. They are targeting the spreadsheet. They are executing a fiscal kill chain, making the cost of defense unsustainable. The lethal exchange ratio is inverted. It does not cost $500 to destroy a $5 million asset. It costs a fraction of that, because the true vector is attrition. The defender must achieve a near-perfect interception rate against a swarm of low-cost threats. The attacker only needs one to get through. This forces a systemic burn rate on the defenders' advanced munitions and platforms, bleeding them dry without a single major confrontation. The West is being forced to trade its knights for the enemy's pawns. This economic leverage is the engine of a strategic shift. Analysts call the democratization of violence. The capability to inflict strategic-level damage is no longer the monopoly of superpowers with trillion-dollar defense budgets. It has been decentralized, handed to non-state actors, proxies, and even individuals. A single operator with a laptop can now project force that once required an air force, creating deniable impact and paralyzing a conventional response. This is the blueprint for asymmetric escalation. The 21st century battlefield is not a geographic location. It is a systemic vulnerability. Adversaries are no longer seizing territory. They are seizing the initiative in the gray zone, ungoverned spaces, digital commons, and even allied nations where the rules of kinetic warfare do not apply. These regions serve as proxy laboratories, staging grounds for low-cost, deniable attacks designed to test responses and erode economic solvency without triggering a conventional military reprisal. Examine the foiled attack on Poland's heating grid. This was not a random act. It was a calculated probe of civilian infrastructure resilience. The objective is not military destruction, but to establish the credibility of a threat. The ability to turn off the heat for an entire population in midwinter. Each probe maps response times and identifies systemic weak points, creating a blueprint for a future systemic shock. Simultaneously, the physical gray zone is being mapped for kinetic advantage. A Russian Vishnya-class intelligence ship operating near Japan is not tourism. According to the Japanese Ministry of Defense, it was conducting intelligence collection, charting the subsurface and electronic environment. This is pre-conflict positioning, a direct analog to a cyber probe executed in the maritime domain to understand the battle space before the first shot is ever fired. Strategic geography itself has become a gray zone asset. The recognition of Greenland as vital to U.S. missile defense confirms this. Control of Arctic corridors is not about territory. It is about controlling launch and intercept vectors. Adversaries understand that establishing a persistent, non-military presence in these zones provides leverage that can neutralize billions in conventional defense architecture. It is a flanking maneuver on a planetary scale. These are not isolated incidents. CSIS reports confirm a pattern of orchestrated stress tests in Western-aligned states, treating their economies and infrastructure as laboratories for asymmetric warfare. The goal is a solvency crisis, induced by 1,000 cuts. While the West budgets for aircraft carriers with a high kinetic cost, adversaries are achieving strategic outcomes with assets that have near-zero political and economic cost. This is the new calculus of global power. The core protocol for nuclear powers is not launch on impact, it is launch on warning. The logic is absolute. If you wait for physical confirmation of an enemy strike, your command, control, and retaliatory assets have already been liquidated. You must launch based on sensor data indicating an inbound attack. This is not a choice. It is a mathematical requirement for deterrence. The critical node in this chain is early warning radar. It is why Greenland was flagged as vital to U.S. security and missile defense. The sensors there are not just equipment, they are the trigger for the entire Western nuclear apparatus. An adversary understands this. They do not need to physically destroy the radar. They only need to blind it. This is the function of asymmetric escalation. While Poland's security services successfully foiled a cyber attack on its heating grid, this event is a data point. It confirms adversaries are actively stress testing and mapping civilian and military networks for critical vulnerabilities. Simultaneously, Russian Vishnya-class intelligence ships probe territorial waters, as one did near Japan, collecting the electronic signatures required to execute such a precise digital strike. This creates the fog of digital war. A commander in a bunker sees the Greenland feed go black. There are no inbound missiles on the screen. There is only silence. Is this a system error, or is it a targeted cyber attack blinding the system while a hypersonic first strike is already minutes from impact? The protocol has no room for ambiguity. A loss of signal from your primary warning sensor is, by definition, a potential decapitation event. According to CSIS analysis, the weaker a conventional power is made to feel, the lower its nuclear threshold becomes. By using a low-cost, deniable cyber vector to create this dilemma, an adversary forces the superpower to confront its own launch protocol. The choice is to risk annihilation by waiting, or trigger Armageddon by launching into the fog. The systemic risk is that the protocol will function as designed. Launch on warning becomes launch on blindness. Analysts at CSIS document a systemic pattern. Cyber attacks on civilian infrastructure are no longer theory. They are rehearsal, evidenced by the foiled strike on Poland's heating grid. Intelligence probes, like the Russian vessel shadowing Japan, are not random. They are mapping response times. This is the blueprint for asymmetric escalation. The next 12 months will feature a calibration shot, a non-kinetic event designed to test the West's strategic solvency and political will. The target vector will be the Arctic, leveraging the region's strategic importance as noted for U.S. missile defense. Expect a temporary, attribution impossible blackout of telemetry and sensor data from the BMEWS site in Thule, Greenland. Not a destructive attack, but a calculated 90-minute data void. The event will be buried as a solar flare anomaly or subsea cable fault, but its purpose is to measure the precise delay between detection, confirmation, and the White House response. It is a test of the launch on warning protocol without firing a shot, a withdrawal against our strategic confidence.